I've got a few questions picked out. I'm going to let this flow like a conversation, but I do have some things I'm excited to pick your brain about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
Not the least, this Scotch. I mean, I want you to walk me through it. As I showed you before we started recording, I haven't even broken the seal on it yet, so it's going to be fun to walk through it here. So, yeah. In order to get started here, I would like for you to just go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody. I have with me Tim, the Whiskey Influencer. If you'd like, just go ahead and give your backstory a little bit, what your channel's about, and we'll kind of get into how you got into whiskey, but for right now, just elevator pitch of your channel.
So my channel is obviously to talk about whiskey, particularly Scotch whiskey. I do lean towards Scotch whiskey over bourbons and American whiskeys and other styles. And I just like to shed some light and insight into lesser known whiskeys for the most part. One of my more popular series is the whiskeys you shouldn't buy anymore. And that's basically showing that there's a lot of marketing money that goes into some of these popular brands that may or may not necessarily lead to good whiskey or whiskey that's better than some of the lesser known stuff out there. So my goal is to bring good valued whiskey to the light for people to have more options other than the brand names that you typically see in stores.
I think that's great, and I mean, I think a lot of people who've been following me for a while know that, especially in the bourbon world, I try to do a very similar thing. I try to basically bring forward these craft brands or these budget brands, these whiskeys you can find sitting on the shelf, and I really appreciate that you do that for Scotch, and that's one of the reasons I'm so excited for this conversation, because I feel like, obviously, you're killing it in the social media game. You've got a ton of followers. Where are you at now on Instagram? Like 130 something?
Yeah, 133-ish thousand, somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah, so I mean, you've got this huge following, and what I love about it is you come at whiskey from a very different perspective than I do. Your content's a little bit different than mine. Like you said, you focus on Scotch a lot, and so I think that's a really interesting conversation to have, because I think it provides a well-rounded perspective from both sides, which is why I have a lot of questions for you about Scotch here as we continue in our conversation. But we will do a review of Bruichladdich, right? Am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah, Bruichladdich. Yeah, either one. It's it's Gaelic. It's hard to pronounce in general, but you've got it.
I mess up Scotch names. It's been an ongoing joke on this podcast, but we've got the Classic Laddie from Bruichladdich, and so we will be drinking that here in just a moment. Now, one question that I always start with that I like to think just breaks the ice, it's real easy, is how did your love of whiskey begin? And you can start as early on that journey as you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, my whiskey journey is actually relatively young compared to some of the other whiskey influencers out there. It started back in 2019. One of my good friends was a whiskey drinker, and he wanted to go to the liquor store with me. And I was like, I don't know, I'm not a big fan of whiskey. And he's like, oh, you should just try it. I was like, all right, I'm going to find a bottle here. If I don't like it, you have to buy it back from me. So that was kind of the deal that we struck. And it was the Nika whiskey from the barrel. And I ended up really enjoying it. And then I was like, huh. And he got a couple of Balvenis and, some mainstream whiskeys. And I tried those and I enjoyed those. They were very different. I was like, man, this is pretty cool how different these whiskeys are. And that kind of spiraled into where I am today. I would start doing some blind whiskey tastings with family members, and each whiskey was so unique and offered a different experience, a different perspective of whiskey. And so it just kind of snowballed into there. And then eventually, it got me into the whiskey influencing Instagram account, all that kind of stuff. But I can't say it's been bad to me. I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the people I've met. I enjoy the whiskeys I've had. So it's been great over the last 4 years.
That's awesome. I mean, yeah, you were starting right about the same time as me then. Did you, before that, what was your kind of experience or your relationship with alcohol? Did you have any of that kind of similar, like I know for me, before I got into whiskey, I didn't have that type of appreciation that you get with whiskey. Alcohol was more, I was in college, it was more for getting buzzed. It was more for social drinking. What was your relationship like that before you got to that whiskey with your friend?
Yeah, so before whiskey, I really enjoyed wine. That was kind of my gateway into the world of more interesting, complex alcohols out there. And I was even kind of a late bloomer into wine. I didn't get into that until I was in my late 20s probably. But that offered a unique, interesting perspective on alcohol more so than other stuff I've had in the past. And the biggest problem I had with wine at the time was that you had to kind of dedicate yourself to an entire bottle in a night or over the course of a couple of nights because wine goes bad. And one of the most appealing things about whiskey to me was that in a single night, I can try 3 or 4 different whiskeys. I can compare them. I can see the differences and the nuances between them. And the bottle doesn't go bad. It can last on your shelf for years and you're never going to ruin the bottle. And that's really kind of why I've shifted and fully gone into the whiskey world. I still enjoy wine on occasion, but whiskey just offers something that no other alcohol to me has been able to offer, at least spirits in general. I do enjoy wines and other spirits out there as well, or rums and cognacs and that kind of stuff.
Okay, yeah. So do you have? I mean, how much do you dabble in like that little world? Because I haven't even touched that world of spirits.
A little bit. There's some really nice rums that I've had that it's probably maybe 3 to 4% of my entire collection you see behind me. So not a ton, but I do like to dabble a little bit in those other spirits just to kind of have a different perspective. And as you know, a lot of Scotch is finished in various types of rum or port or other styles of other spirits and alcohols. So being able to go to the source of those finishes really kind of helps build out your palate and pick up some of those nuances in a Scotch whiskey. So it's kind of all interconnected.
Yeah, it really is. And that's one of the reasons I was actually just talking with somebody about that at the Kentucky Bourbon Festival about I need to do that. I need to branch out and try that. So for those listening who, this is some of the stuff I wanted to start to ask you about. For those listening who are looking to get into Scotch, especially because I have a lot of bourbon drinkers listening, I think it's fair to say one of the ways that you can get better at picking up on Scotch flavor notes, since there's such a wide array of different finishes, is like you just said, trying those finishes and seeing what you can look for when you're trying it in a Scotch.
Yeah.
Now, I am curious because we do have a little bit of banter about this, the bourbon versus the Scotch. What made you gravitate specifically towards Scotch? Was there like a moment that you realized, oh, I just like Scotch better, or is it just like you just naturally did?
It was more so that those were the first styles of whiskey that I would buy, and I noticed how different one Scotch was from the next. And most bourbons, at least at lower proofs, like sub 50% ABV, just didn't really engage and click with me as much. They were a little more one-dimensional, a little bit heavy on the sweet side, and I couldn't really pick out a ton of nuance with it. And it wasn't until later in my whiskey journey that I discovered Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, which was my gateway into bourbons, that I was like, all right, bourbons can actually be really fantastic and really good whiskeys out there. But I still have a harder time engaging with bourbons in general than I do with Scotch whiskey, just because we've talked about this before. And from my perspective, the gamut of flavor profiles for a bourbon is much, much narrower. So you have 51% corn, virgin oak casks, and those two are so dominant in flavor that it's hard to kind of really take yourself away from some of those flavor profiles. They're always going to be there in most bourbons, which I enjoy, I like, but I've never found myself wanting to have, dozens of bottle of bourbons, because to me, they all are so similar in their flavor profile, their base flavor profile, that it hasn't quite caught up with me. At least maybe I haven't had enough of the right bourbons out there, but I do enjoy them, but just haven't really found that engagement and that intrigue as I do with Scotch whiskeys.
Yeah, and I always find that interesting. I forget who I was just talking with about this. If you speak with somebody who prefers Scotch, they're always going to tell you that it has a wider array of flavors. And if you speak with somebody who prefers bourbon, in my experience at least, they're always going to tell you, well, it has a better array of flavors. And I find that really interesting because I think it could be kind of, I don't know if you've heard like some people like cilantro, other ones think it tastes like soap. Like, I don't know if it could be something with your palate where certain people can just pull the nuance out of Scotch and they're like, wow, these are so different. This, something is special here. And some people have that same reaction with bourbon. I don't know that science really knows that, but I think it's really an interesting approach. considering bourbon is so much better than Scotch. No, I'm kidding. I had to throw that in there. No, I love Scotch, and I'm excited to get into this bottle, so I am going to crack it and start getting a little bit of a nose on it here.
And I'll touch on that point that you just made there. And I think people who tend to drink bourbon more and people who tend to drink Scotch more, a lot of whiskey is practice, and you got to drink a lot of it in order to build out your palate. So I think you're 100% right that if you're constantly drinking bourbon, you're going to be able to pick out some of those nuances in the different mash bills, in the different rickhouse aging, and the various different parameters that kind of go into a bourbon. And the same is true with Scotch whiskey. That being said, I mean, there's a clear difference in, I feel like for Scotch whiskey, malted barley, if you're going to talk about single malt or blended malts, it's a perfect vessel to carry other flavor, other nuances from refill casks. And then obviously you've got peated versus non-peated, which obviously is a dramatically different flavor profile from one to the next, which you don't, at least in my experience, I haven't noticed such a large difference in flavor profile going from one bourbon to the next. But maybe it's just something that I need to practice more and explore more in my whiskey journey.
Yeah, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but I love what you said there right in the beginning. I haven't heard anybody say it from this perspective before. This is why I was excited about your perspective on this. So you said single malt, or if you're talking about a malt-based recipe, is a great carrier for other flavors. And what I love about that perspective is in the world of bourbon, as finished bourbons have become a little bit more mainstream and a little bit more popular, there are individuals who dislike them because they say you're just trying to cover up the taste of the bourbon. So it's like, there are folks in the United States, or at least bourbon drinkers, who have the complete flip side of that, who have, they're like, it's not a carrier for other flavors, it's the flavor. So I think that is a great dual side of the coin that I hope people appreciate, because I personally think moving into finished bourbons is exciting. I'm really excited to see what it does for the bourbon world. And I also think that perspective on Scotch is really interesting because it's a great point. Yeah. So I think I just want to point that out for those listening, who I know I have a lot of listeners who fall on both sides of the finished bourbon debate. I at least like to call it finished bourbon and not just bourbon, but great point that you made there. Now, as I move into this glass of Scotch, I already just took one smell of it and I'm already really excited to get into it. Bruichladdich is typically peated. Am I right? Except not this bottle, but typically they peat their stuff. Am I right in that?
So the Bruichladdich under the Bruichladdich name is mostly unpeated. So this one's unpeated. They do have a line of peated whiskeys called Port Charlotte. That's going to be, or Octomore. Both of those brands are their peated style. Bruichladdich in general is an unpeated Islay Scotch whiskey, which is unique to Islay. Most Islay whiskeys are peated, or at least they have the perception of being peated. Bruichladdich, Bunnahabhain, those are a couple Islay Scotch whiskeys that are typically unpeated in style.
Okay, yes. I guess I didn't realize those were separated under the umbrella, because I saw Port Charlotte, and I haven't had that either, but I had heard that it's very peaty, and I think, is Octomore like the super duper ultra peaty one? Okay. That's what I thought. Yeah. So, okay, good to know. So yeah, this is, Bunnahabhain, just their plain 10 years also not peated. Is that correct?
That's unpeated as well. Yep.
Okay, so this is only the second unpeated Islay that I will have had. So I'm really excited to get into it.
Yeah, and Bruichladdich in general. So this is a great bottle for people looking into get into Scotch whiskey, at least whiskey drinkers, because it's a good value. It's around $60. It's bottled at a good presentation, 50% ABV, so you get a little bit of extra complexity. You can play around with a little water some more than you can in other whiskeys, and it's it's just a very nice whiskey. And then Bruichladdich also is very transparent with what goes in the bottle. I don't know if you know this, but if you go to their website and you type in the code, there's a code in the back of your bottle, you can see the exact cask makeup of the bottle you're drinking. There should be a little code that's like 2 numbers - 3 numbers. If you type that code into the website. So, for example, the one I'm drinking right now, it's 7 years old. It's made from 82 casks, 4 vintages, 3 barley types, and 9 cask types, primarily ex-bourbon casks, but there's some French wine in here. There's some sherry cask in here. So it's extraordinarily transparent in what is in the bottle, which, as enthusiasts, we love that.
Oh yeah, the whiskey geek in me, as you were saying that, was like, that is awesome. I'm probably gonna look it up here in a minute as you're talking. That way we can look at what mine is. So it's the one that's like actually etched into the paint. Is that right? Right next to the date.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
I am going to look that one up. As I'm getting into this, though, you mentioned how they're transparent about the recipe, and if I'm not mistaken, they mentioned on their website that they don't follow like a specific batch for this. It's more based on like, I don't know what you would want to call it, the vibe. They didn't say that, but that's what I would consider it, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, with their Classic Laddie, which is their intro into their Scotch whiskey portfolio, yeah, they'll play around with it. Each release will be a little bit different because they're just throwing a bunch of different things in there that kind of have the core characteristics of the Classic Laddie. But yeah, there's no set style. I mean, that's why they allow you to look it up and see exactly what's in there. Obviously, they can only tell you what the youngest whiskey in there is. So this one's a 7-year-old, but there's going to be older whiskey in this bottle as well.
Okay. Now help me out here. Tell me where I type this in at so we can figure out what's in my
All right, so I
bottle.
just in the chat I sent you a link. Let me make sure
Okay.
that's the right link. All right, yeah. So I sent you a link. Click on that, and then there should be enter 5-digit code, and that should allow you to see what's in the bottle that you have. Mine was from 2020. My guess is yours is a couple of years more recent.
Awesome. Yeah, this is 2022. I think it said. Yes, June of 2022. I'm going to throw the code in here and we'll see what it is. Now, how much variety are we talking between these bottles? Do they, well, I guess we're about to see with my example, but do they throw in like some wildly different finishes, or do you notice that it's fairly consistent across the...
It's going to be fairly consistent. It's going to be mostly ex-bourbon, ex-refill bourbon casks. So it's going to have that, slightly more orchard, the tropical fruit forward style of whiskey with those salinity of the coastal maturation. But you'll see some interesting, like, red wine casks in there, some sherry casks thrown in there. So it'll add some hints of other flavor profiles.
Okay, now you hit the nail right on the head for what I was smelling, at least in the beginning, was super like fruity, pops out of the glass. I will concede about, there being a large variety when it comes to Scotch, because this smells like nothing else that I've had so far in the world of Scotch, for sure. Okay, here we go. Go ahead.
This one is not designed to necessarily blow you away in terms of its, super rare, engaging whiskey, but you're looking at it from the perspective of a $60 bottle of Scotch whiskey, 50% ABV, at least 7 years old. It's a great value, and it's an interesting whiskey to try. And then, I always recommend people play around with a few drops of water, see how it changes, see how it evolves, and then let the air kind of get into the bottle as well over the next few weeks and see what you think of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would consider it almost like, I always thought Glenlivet Caribbean Reserve is like a nice kind of welcoming glass. This is like, it's similarly welcoming, but it's got way more flavor and complexity. I mean, it is in a significantly different price range from Glenlivet Caribbean Reserve, but it just brings more pop to it. I mean, it jumps right out of the glass at you.
Yeah, I get some nice maltiness from it too. You can taste the youth in it, which is perfectly fine for this style of whiskey. And I don't know if I'm guessing yours has the taste profile diagram, which I think is really cool, where they give you how your particular bottle kind of skews towards fruity or floral, or what are the various characteristics are.
Yes, and I will cover that. I'm glad that you told me how to look this up, because I like to always we'll give our notes, we'll talk about what we like and don't like about it. And then at the end, I like to talk about what the distiller says you should taste, because I want people to get our unbiased opinion before we've read that. I mean, I know that you know kind of what you're expecting, but at least I don't. And then we will talk about what the distiller says you should get. So you kind of get both perspectives, because sometimes distillers hit the nail on the head and sometimes they don't. So I like to really cover both.
Yeah, and I mean, for me personally, I almost never look at the tasty notes on the side of a bottle, even after I've drunk it. Typically, what from the distillery, the cask type, how old it is. You have already an idea in your mind of what it should taste like or what you expect it to taste like, and then it'll be just interesting to see how it deviates from your expectations. So that's kind of how I always go into, just tasting whiskeys in general.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to go about it. Now, in my bottle here, we've got a vatting of 83 casks, 4 vintages, 6 barley types, and 13 cask types. So just the first couple that it lists here, we've got French oak first fill, U.S. bourbon first fill, and then France Bordeaux. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing that right. A Merlot, second fill.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. If you're a whiskey geek and you're listening to this, especially if you're on the email list and you bought this bottle in advance, go look that up. That is super cool. I will be looking at that later on because I love that transparency. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's one of the few distilleries that are this transparent. This and the Blender Compass Box, those are the two most transparent whiskey makers in Scotland. Both of them tell you exactly what you're drinking, which is great. It's like, for me, I love seeing the data behind the actual bottle that I'm drinking. It's just fun to look at.
Absolutely. I've complained before on here when I'm reviewing something if they got all this awesome marketing and you're like, this is exciting, and you go look it up and it's like, this is our whiskey, and then that's it. And like it doesn't tell you anything about it. I can't stand that.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, another question that I had for you, as we're admiring the Scotch, we're talking about how great it is. If you had to pick a runner-up type of whiskey, you can't pick Scotch, what would be your next favorite?
My number 2 would be Irish whiskey.
Okay.
It's obviously, there's a lot of parallels to Scotch whiskey, but a single pot still Irish whiskey has an additional grassiness to it that is just so unique to its style that I love. Like I sent you a sample of the Redbreast 12-year-old cask strength, and just it's such a unique style of a it's 100% barley, but it's got some unmalted barley, some malted barley. And it's creates a unique perspective and a really interesting style of whiskey that I love to drink. So that would be my number 2 right after Scotch whiskey.
Awesome. I'm glad you didn't just say like Irish single malts or Japanese single malts. I like that you said single pot still because I was like, crap, maybe I should have cut out single malt altogether. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
That unmalted barley gives it this super different taste to it that I also very much enjoy. And we've talked about that Redbreast 12-year since you introduced me to the cask strength, and I don't know if I can go back to just normal strength. Now, as I'm diving into this, I'll give some opinions, and obviously you might agree, you might disagree, but I'll kind of do this as if I am the guest because you're the one who knows more about this bottle. I'm going to throw out some opinions, and I'd like to just bounce them off you and see your thoughts as well. This so far, and I'm assuming, obviously, you already mentioned it, you've had Bunnahabhain as well a couple times, so I can compare to that a little bit because that's like my only compass in this right now is that I've had the Bunnahabhain. This, to me, has much more of like a juicy type of a fruit to it, whereas the Bunnahabhain for me had like a sour candy type of a fruit. And the Bunnahabhain also for me had more of the brininess, whereas this is coming through with more of the fruitiness, almost like a fruit that was sprinkled with like a salt. Like if you take a fruit and you just put a little bit of salt on it. Definitely a little bit of malt in there, but I'm getting so much fruit forward that it's surprising me quite a bit right now.
What's the youngest vintage or distillation year for yours?
That is an excellent question.
It'll only reveal one date, so that'll give you your answer.
Okay. So if I go over here, bottled in 2022, where does it put that date at?
So if you look at the different cask types, one of them will show you the distillation year.
Oh, okay. So I'd have to find which one says the year. Let's see. Oh man, there's a ton of, they share them all, but there's a ton of casks.
Oh yeah. Oh, you said 13 cask types, right?
Oh yeah. Is it always 13 or is it just
No, mine's 9 cask types, so they vary each
oh
each
my
batch.
gosh. Okay, 2015, that's the youngest here. And then bottled in 2022, so 7-year.
Yeah, so that's the same age as mine. So obviously the drink that I'm drinking is going to be slightly different than yours, but the bones will be about the same. But I would have to agree with your general assessment if you're comparing it to the Bunnahabhain 12. Bunnahabhain 12 will have more of that sherry influence, which will kind of deaden some of that more juicy sweetness. And kind of bring out some more like chocolatey dark fruits from it. And this one, for me, at least what I'm getting, I do get some more, maybe a little bit more of that salinity to it than you are. And then I do get the barley and kind of orchard fruits. Those are kind of the takeaways for me, which for me is nice. This is a great starter whiskey for me if I'm having a flight of whiskeys, because it's not overpowering in any direction, and it helps acclimate our palates to maybe some more dynamic whiskeys right after.
Definitely, and I'm glad you pointed out that sherry. So Bunnahabhain is sherried then? I don't remember because I haven't
It's
looked at it
ex-bourbon
in
and
forever.
it's sherry, but it's got a
Okay.
more heavily sherried influence.
Definitely. And so I'm glad you pointed that out because a lot of times the sherried for me I always get this slightly bitter note on my tongue from things that are heavily sherried. And I didn't know until you said that. I think that's what's making this seem so fruit forward to me because I'm not getting that little bit of bitterness that goes with the sherry. And
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying it. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that this is a great kind of get your feet wet and see that fruitiness in the front with the barley taste, of course. Before, at least if you're like me and that sherry note starts to bother you a little bit before you dive into that sherried stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a good bare bones style of Scotch whiskey. It might not be for everybody, but ex-bourbon cask, that's the most common form of maturation for Scotch whiskeys, and that gives you kind of the baseline of what a Scotch whiskey can be. Obviously, every distillery has its unique style, but if you get like a well-aged, like a 20-plus-year-old ex-bourbon cask Scotch whiskey, I mean, it just pounds you with like those tropical fruits, coconuts and mangoes, vanilla. It's such a wonderful experience. So, I mean, for people who are against finishes and different styles of maturation, if you just take bare bones Scotch whiskey, you can really make a wonderful style out of it just with age and the right conditions of aging.
Okay, now that opens up a question for me. And you don't have to give your exact answer. You can always just give, oh, this one comes to mind. But
Yeah.
people always love to ask, the oldest whiskeys that you've had, things like that. But what's the oldest Scotch that you've had that held up to its age? So the age wasn't just a gimmick. You were like, this is wowing me with its age right now.
Yeah, that would probably be. There's a few, but the one that first pops to my mind is it's called Dalhousie is the name of the distillery. It's a lesser known Scotch whiskey distillery. Most of their stuff goes into blends. It's owned by Diageo, which makes Johnny Walker. So a lot of their whiskeys go into Johnny Walker blends. One of the more prominent independent bottlers in Scotland called Signatory bought some casks of Dalhousie, and I recently, maybe a year or two ago, bought a few bottles of their Dalhousie 23-year-old. Phenomenal value. It was under $200 for a 23-year-old Scotch whiskey at cask strength. Only ex-bourbon cask, so straightforward, bare bones Scotch whiskey. And it's just so wonderful and fruity and creamy. I mean, it's just a whiskey that really is one of the best that I've ever had. So that one would be the one that kind of sticks out in my mind as, all right, 23 years old. It was a really good value, and you can taste the extra age with this ex-bourbon cask. It's nothing fancy, just super old ex-bourbon whiskey that's phenomenal.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds very interesting. I guess I didn't even think about how the bourbon casks would affect it as it continues to get older, because in the world of bourbon, you don't let the bourbon get super old a lot of the time. You've got a very different climate when you're aging it over here, and the corn's going to let that oak come through full force. So that's a really interesting take, and I clearly haven't had anything super old aged in a bourbon cask. So we've already talked before. I'm going to be ordering some stuff based on your recommendations. So that's very interesting. I'd be interested in trying some of the older stuff and seeing. I guess I'm a little bit surprised by the notes that you mentioned the bourbon casks give it. I'd like to see that perspective and see if I see a familiarity with bourbon.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, obviously the much cooler climate means it's not going to get over oaked. And if you get a refill bourbon, like a second fill, third fill bourbon cask, and let it mature for a very long time, it won't get over oaky, but those tropical fruits really start coming through in the creaminess. I mean, it really delivers such a wonderful whiskey experience. So definitely something to keep an eye out on. I'll have to see if I can find any samples for you to try out, just so you can experience some of these older styles of Scotch whiskey. We need to increase your Scotch whiskey collection relative to your bourbon collection. I'm sure it's the ratio is very low right now. We need to kind of bump that back up.
Yeah. Hey, we need to bump up your bourbon collection a little bit. Anybody who tells me you can try two bourbons, they taste pretty similar, I got to get you some bourbons that don't.
Yeah, well, I actually have some of the samples that you sent me. I haven't actually delved into them yet, but I am starting to taste some more bourbons. I do get a ton of samples sent to me, a lot of bottles sent to me from various distributors. So I am trying to kind of build out the bourbon palette, but unless it's finished, like the Barrel Bourbon Vantage has that unique finish to it, which I really liked. For me, that was kind of an above average bourbon because it added a perspective to bourbon that I hadn't had before. If it's just your straight old bourbon, it's like oaky if it's old, kind of sweet, similar characteristics, younger. So, still trying to get some of those nuances.
Yeah, no, totally. Have you had by chance then Barrel's Seagrass? It's a rye that's finished.
I don't think I've had the Seagrass, though. I do like rye finished whiskeys as well, so that's one to keep an eye out on.
I might have to shoot you over a sample of it. Yeah, they take a rye and they finish it in apricot brandy, Madeira, and something else casks. That's gonna bother me. Whatever the third one is. People are listening right now, screaming at the phone, but it's totally different because it's got those. They do a really good job of bringing those three together. So I'll have to get you over. And of course, since it's barrel, it's at cask strength. So I'll have to
which
get you
we
over
love.
a sample. Yeah,
and just to follow up, it's the rum, Madeira, and apricot brandy barrels.
Yes, rum. I forgot. Okay, yes, it's rum, and the rum brings you that sweet kind of molassesy. The apricot comes through like full force. It's totally different. I'll have to get you a sample of it. And the samples that you did send me, the Compass box that you mentioned, I loved that. I think it was No Name 2 or 3.
3. No Name 3.
No Name 3. Really enjoyed that. I think my patrons enjoyed it because I did a bunch of I did those reviews on Patreon so people could get kind of an extended thoughts since I was trying something new. So yeah, I really like branching out into Scotch, which is going to really well segue into the questions that I have for you. The first one, and this is one that I've had people ask me, and I've straight up told them, I don't know that I can really answer that because I don't have enough experience. You could only mention a couple if you want, or you can go through all of them, but what flavors or brands do you think of when you think of each of the regions of Scotland? And so we'll start with Highland. What type of flavor or brand do you think of when you think of that?
So the regionality of Scotch whiskey is more of a kind of past thing, an archaic thing. The regionality of specific flavor profiles have kind of blended together in recent years as different regions will try different styles of whiskey. In general, the Highlands were kind of a catch-all because you had the 4 other regions, and everything not in the 4 other regions were just bucketed into the Highlands. So you have island distilleries that are technically part of the Highlands, which are going to be more coastal. With more of those maritime salinity styles of whiskey, and then you have some Highlanders that are a little bit more robust and meaty, kind of like a Clynelish, which has some nice waxiness to it. So I mean, it's and then you have plenty of peated styles of Highlands, like Lechic, which is made by Tobermory Distillery on the Isle of Mull. So really, the flavor profile of the Highlands is the most diverse because it's just kind of a catch-all, and they make all styles of whiskey.
Okay, I'm so glad you said that because, first of all, I've had a few different ones from different regions that I've thought they taste similar, and like if you look it up, people are like, "Well, this tastes like this and this tastes like that," and I'm like, but really they taste kind of similar. And then when I found out, I think it's Talisker. There's a few of them that are technically Highland but are peated, and I was like, wait a minute. Obviously, this is when I was really getting into it, but I'm like, I thought Islay was like all the peated stuff. So I'm glad to have you break that down since you have such a knowledge of it. Now, so then let me narrow it down a little bit then. I'll narrow down the question. What region do you think, aside from Islay being peated, because I think that's a softball, what other region do you think has the most distinct kind of personality to it?
It would have to be Campbelltown, Scotland. Okay. So this is the smallest region. It only has 3 active distilleries right now. Springbank, which is my favorite distillery, has 3 different brands: Springbank, Longrow, Hazelburn. It's got Glen Scotia and then Kilkerran, which is from the Glengyle distillery, which is owned by Springbank. So it's basically the sister distillery on the same site. But that one would have the most unique style of whiskey. And did I send you a sample of Springbank or no?
You did. That was fantastic.
Yeah, the Springbank 10, I'm guessing, was what I sent you.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of it. I mean, it's gently peated, so you'll get a little bit of that smokiness on the background, but then you get this industrial, like oily style funkiness to it that is very, very unique to that region of Scotland. And a lot of that has to do with where it is, because it's right by the coast, so you get some of that coastalness. And then everything they do on site is what they did from back in the 1800s. It's very old style. They have no new technology, so the way they make whiskey hasn't evolved at all. So it's a very old style, industrial, dirty whiskey, which I personally love. It's got so much character and intrigue to it.
Okay, so are you saying that even the process is a little bit different in how they're doing it that's giving it that character?
Yeah. I mean, everything they do is a lot of distilleries in Scotland, and I'm sure in the United States, they have a lot of computer generation, tell you where the cut points are, and everything is kind of automated to a certain point. Whereas in Springbank, the closest thing to automation is a little bell that rings when something needs to be changed. That just goes around the cog. So it's really very old. So, there's a lot more human variance, we'll say. So you're not going to get consistencies from batch to batch, which for me, I love having a Springbank 10 from 2023 that tastes a little bit different than the one I had from 2 years ago, because it's just that's part of why we love whiskey, is to see these nuances and the evolution and change over time. And then obviously Scotland is known for their dunnage warehouses. I'm sure you're familiar with dunnage warehouses. That's an Yeah, so basically, for those who don't know, it's a warehouse in Scotland that's basically ages the casks right on the dirt, so it gets some more dankness, some more funkiness into it. Springbank's not the only distillery that has it. Many distilleries have those types of warehouses in Scotland, but that's another reason why they have kind of an earthy funkiness to their styles of whiskey.
Okay, yeah, I was going to try to describe it, and I was going to be wrong, so I'm glad you jumped in. I actually didn't even know that. That's really interesting. Okay. So, is it safe to say then that that's your favorite region, or do you don't like to play favorites?
I mean, it's Springbank is my favorite distillery, and it's one of 3 distilleries in Campbelltown. So it's it would be my favorite region. But and I love Kilkerran too, their sister distillery. Glen Scotia, it's fine. I don't like it nearly as much as Springbank, but yeah, in general, Campbelltown is my go-to.
Okay, good to know. And like I said, you sent that Springbank. I really enjoyed that. Actually, even had it on an episode. So that's one of the ones when I do put in an order, I'm very carefully picking what I'm going to order. But something from Campbelltown, if I can get my hands on it, is definitely going to be.
It's hard in today's day and age. It's very hard to get Campbelltown whiskeys. But the more Springbank you drink, the more you're gonna learn about it, engage with it, and kind of just fall in love with it. So I sent you a 1 ounce sample. If you had a full bottle of Springbank 10, by the bottom of it, it would climb the ranks of your favorite distilleries, even within the United States. I mean, it's just an incredible whiskey.
Yeah, I don't doubt that, honestly, because I did a whole episode while I was tasting it, and I just kept saying, like, I can't believe that this tastes so different from what I was expecting, and I was really enjoying that. And speaking of United States whiskeys, that segues me to a question I wanted to ask you. American single malts, they're blowing up. You're hearing about them places. What have you had, and what is your take as somebody who likes Scotch whiskey so much?
So I mean, obviously, American single malt is the kind of the new hot whiskey in the United States. It's not still far from as popular as the standard bourbons and whatnot and rye whiskeys, but I haven't had a ton of American single malts because for me, the biggest challenge is the price of entry. Obviously, they're smaller productions, and so typically you're paying for around $75 for an American single malt. Chances are they're not going to be better than what we're drinking right now, the Bruichladdich. And unless they have a really unique process that is very different than Scotland, it's hard for me to justify the premium unless I feel like it's a local distillery that I really want to support. So I haven't really engaged too much with American single malts. That said, there is an American single malt distillery that's about an hour north of me in New York. It's called 10 Mile Distillery, and they're the only distillery in the United States who actually was able to hire a master distiller from Scotland. He previously worked at Wolfburn in Scotland, and he makes American single malts exactly like you would make in Scotch whiskey, except for super long fermentation times, and every step along the process is done with the exact care you'd expect it to. No shortcuts, nothing. And I've only had one sample of their 3-year-old release, and it was superb. It tasted much, much older than a 3-year-old single malt whiskey. So very excited to see what they have to offer over the next few years.
Yeah, and that's actually what I'm excited to see with American single malts is how they taste compared to the age because of that different climate that we've got in the US.
Yep. Yep.
I can't wait to see what happens. Like you said, it's still the premium's still kind of high and a lot of these distilleries are still getting going, but it's not even like something that's very easy to source because it's so new. So these distilleries are really trying to get their feet under them and it's really exciting to see.
Absolutely.
Now I will ask, and you can plead the fifth if you'd like. What are a few of your favorite bourbons that you've had? You did mention Elijah Craig Barrel Proof.
Yeah, so Elijah Craig Barrel Proof was my gateway into really engaging and enjoying bourbons. And I'm still looking for that C923. So if you have any connections, keep me posted because that one is the elusive one where it's just impossible to find in any liquor stores. Anytime there's an age statement hike, people are going to go crazy over it. But anyways, so that was one. Larceny Barrel Proof I've kind of engaged with. I've been enjoying that one as well, especially the I think it was B 523, the one that came out just before this most recent one, which was really, really nice and fruitier than I expected. Let me think. I got a sample of High and Wicked. Have you heard of the brand High and Wicked?
I don't think I have.
It's a relatively new brand. It sources from MGP like most other places, but they also source from Tennessee whiskey, and they sent me a bottle of what's called the Judge. It's a 14-year-old Tennessee whiskey, and bottled to 52%, and it just had this nice oaky nuttiness to it that I really kind of engaged with and really enjoyed. So that was another one that I've been drinking recently that I've been liking. And then I mentioned to you the Vantage I really enjoy because I like that finish. Adds a nice dynamic, unique style of bourbon to it without overshadowing what makes bourbon good. Just try. Let me take a look at my shelf back here. Some of the other bourbons. I've got some smoke. Yep. Some smoke wagons. Obviously classic MGP. That's some good stuff. Especially the uncut, unfiltered, cask strength, very well made bourbons. Knob Creek store picks always tend to be pretty good. They're usually around 60% ABV with 10, 11, 12 years of age. I mean, it's hard to go wrong. I mean, a lot of these bourbons I'm mentioning to me have very, similar, at least base flavor profiles. So I don't reach for them as often, but those are ones that I've been engaging with and enjoying over the last, few years.
Yeah, and so you're reaching for a lot of the high proof stuff, it sounds like, as well. What's your favorite proof point? Is it the same for bourbon and Scotch? And if not, what are your favorite proof points?
I always like it at cask strength, so it doesn't, if it's 55% versus 65%, I'm fine with either one because I'm always going to play around with some water. I'll try it neat, but then I'll kind of put a few drops of water in a time and kind of unpeel the onion that is the whiskey to see how it kind of evolves and changes with different amounts of water. So for me, that's why I like all cask strength whiskeys, whether it's Scotch or bourbons. And then I might end up watering it down to like 46, 47, 48% anyways to finish off the drink. But it just allows so much more flexibility in the drinking experience. So that's why I'm always looking for cask strength whiskeys.
Yeah, no, that's an absolutely great point. I'm glad you mentioned it too, because I was going to add a little drop here to my Bruichladdich and see how it changes a little bit. To wrap up my opinion on this one so far, the Bruichladdich, I think that the tropical fruit notes that you mentioned are spot on, and as I'm drinking it, I'm getting more of that maltiness. It's kind of like you get the fruit right on the front, and then as it fades, the maltiness sticks around for me, and so then each sip, I'm kind of getting more of the maltiness building up on my palate, which is definitely enjoyable, and it also makes the experience kind of change as you continue through the glass. I did just add a little bit of water, though, so we'll see how that changes.
Yeah. We'll see how that changes. Then of course, you'd expect maltiness in a whiskey that is primarily 7 years old, which is fine. I think sometimes the youthfulness can be a little off-putting to some people, but for me, especially with a nice blended, like the way they blend this Bruichladdich Classic Laddie, the maltiness adds a nice complement to those fruity orchard tropical notes and a little bit of that coastal influence to it. So it's a very well-made entry-level Scotch whiskey.
Yeah, and I mentioned that the maltiness sticks around because I think and maybe it's just my palate right now, but compared to a lot of other scotches that I've had, it's not so much on the forefront with the malt. Like it doesn't smack you with the malt flavor. It slowly kind of builds throughout the glass. Not to say that that's a problem, because I actually really like a malty flavor, probably because if I'm drinking Scotch, I'm looking for the malty flavor. But
of course.
But this is a nice little change up where it's not the first thing that I noticed when I smelled it and when I tasted it, which is really interesting.
Yeah, no, it's a dynamic whiskey, and again, for $60, it's hard to have any complaints about this. I mean, there are even better valued Scotch whiskeys out there than $60, but 50% ABV, at least 7 years old, dynamic blend from the Bruichladdich distillery. It's a really, really well made whiskey.
Absolutely. I can see this being one that I will recommend in the future. And as I added that water to it, it did bring out a little bit of that brininess. I don't know if it's because it dulled the fruit a little bit, but I got more of the brine from it with that water. Overall, dynamic that you mentioned, dynamic's a great word. Dynamic's a great word for this glass. It's got a lot going on. I'm getting a lot of different things, but not in an overwhelming manner and not... presented in a way that they all just hit your palate and it's all like, oh my gosh, because sometimes I've had whiskeys do that and it's like, ugh. But no, it's presented in a really nice way. Now I will mention, as I mentioned, I like to go through what the distiller mentions, so I'll just go through the basic classic Laddie notes here. So, and I'd like to hear your opinion. We'll go through, they have character on here, and then we'll go through character, nose, palate, finish. I'd like to hear your opinion, since you normally don't do this, you normally don't read the notes on what they present here. Character, they say, and I don't know what this means, but they say, smooth as pebbles in a pool, it's clean, fresh, and lively, with both the oak and the grain in perfect harmony. I think that's fair. I think... smooth as pebbles in a pool is an interesting it's an interesting way to put it.
Anytime I see the word smooth on a whiskey bottle, I just think, all right, their marketing team is here, because the casual whiskey drinker or the infrequent whiskey drinker, the way they describe a good whiskey is that it's smooth. Oh, that's a smooth whiskey. That means it has to be good. So the fact that it's saying smooth, I wouldn't necessarily describe this as a smooth whiskey. It's a fairly simple whiskey for the most part. It does have some layers to it. It is pretty dynamic. But smooth is, I like the wording. I mean, it's very poetic. So I guess we'll give them that.
Yeah, we'll give them that. I think oak and grain being in harmony is clever because it's like I mentioned, that grain doesn't punch you in the face. It kind of plays with the oakiness, so I do like that.
Yeah, I think that is an accurate way to describe this, because of its youth, you can taste that barley a little bit more, and it's mostly the ex-bourbon cask, so which is more going to be oak forward, so it does have that kind of interaction to it. So I think that's a well said description.
Yeah. Now, speaking of poetic, their nose and their palate are like paragraphs, so I'm not going to bore everybody by just reading those paragraphs. Feel free to look it up yourself. But here's just a couple of the things that they mentioned. So, barley sugar, a hint of mint, which is kind of interesting, freshly cut wildflowers, cherry blossom is definitely... the fruitiness is definitely there. And then, hold on, I'm trying to wade through some of the, exposition that they give here. They mentioned that you get a little bit of the coastal flavor from it. And then it says, caramelized fruits drift onto the scene, lemon drops and honey, tangerine, and tablet. Caramelized fruits, I would say I agree with.
Yeah, I think that's a good description.
And that's all just on the nose. And then the palate, it's they go deep with their descriptions. Barrel that you mentioned, I had one of their bottles on here. I think it was Seagrass, and it was similarly poetic. They mentioned sweet oak and barley arriving together, sending the taste buds into raptures. Fruits from distillation, Atlantic breeze, champagne bubbles. That's an interesting one that I haven't heard before. Ripe green fruit, brown sugar, malt, and then let me get past some more exposition. You must use barley that is made in Scotland. Makes this a benchmark for other. Okay, so then they just go into talking about the barley a little bit. The palate, I think, is very fair, I would say. Yeah,
and I actually like that champagne bubbles because it does have like an effervescence to it that is kind of unique, and like a nice freshness that's in this whiskey that's really enjoyable.
Yeah, I've never thought of it that way. It's kind of like the opposite of when something feels creamy on your palate. It's like, champagne bubbles is a clever way to put it. Kind of like a juice, like if you've had like a white grape juice, like that type of bite, effervescence, like you mentioned. That's a good word for it.
Yep.
So yeah, anyhow, I like to run through those notes for those listening. Don't ever think that you're wrong because a distiller says one thing or the other, but that's what they say, and I like to run through it for that reason.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on that comment. One of the reasons I rarely talk about my own personal whiskey tasting notes is because tasting notes are so subjective. Everybody's palate is unique and different. So what I'm tasting won't necessarily be what you're tasting. What you're tasting isn't necessarily wrong. Everybody just tastes and pulls out different things based on their experience, based on their genetics, based on their palate. So, it's hard to really, it's hard to really trust tasting notes unless your palate aligns with whomever you're talking with.
Yes, yeah, and I've had that before. I have a lot of my friends on here, like from before the pot, like not influencer friends, but just my friends on here, and I like to have them on because they're newer to whiskey, and we'll compare notes. And a lot of times I'll say like, I think you're saying this, and I'm getting this, and those are different, but that's okay. Like you mentioned, everybody's palate is definitely different. But I think, we can still at least get to the core of the bottle. Like there's stuff that we're going to agree on that's similar. But yeah, sometimes distillers will dress them up and make them a little bit poetic.
Definitely.
Now to round it out, a lot of my followers, I drink a lot of bourbon. A lot of us drink bourbon and Scotch and Irish whiskey and rye and all that. But definitely, at least from the questions that I get, from the people that I do talk to and interface with, there's a lot of bourbon drinkers listening. And I was curious if you could just lay out, maybe even based on your experience on how you got into Scotch. If I'm a bourbon drinker and I'm curious about Scotch, I want to delve into maybe a couple bottles, or I am not even sure where to get started. How would you recommend a bourbon drinker kind of migrate into the world of Scotch?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying that it's been much harder for me to convert bourbon drinkers into Scotch than Scotch drinkers into bourbon. Bourbon drinkers, at least in my experience, tend to really like that bold sweetness that comes from a bourbon in general. So when they go to a much more subtle style of whiskey, like a Scotch whiskey that's matured in ex-bourbon casks, it'll come off as kind of uninteresting, hard to pick out some of those more flavors that aren't super prominent on the palate. So it's been a challenge for some of my bourbon drinking friends to kind of get them over there. But I will say, don't ever pigeonhole yourself into any one subset of any spirit. Explore Scotch whiskeys, bourbons, rums, mezcals, tequilas, anything any spirit out there will only kind of build your palate. And if you're going to go into Scotch whiskey, if you like those, bold cask strength or barrel proof bourbons, then I would say seek some cask strength or barrel proof sherried Scotch whiskey, because the sherry tends to be a very bold, dominant flavor profile, very different than bourbon, but it's a flavor profile that's easier to kind of pick out and say, all right, I'm getting some very strong flavors here. I can kind of engage with this, and that might help you kind of lead or gateway into different styles of Scotch whiskey that are a little bit more subtle and nuanced. And I've noticed it's oddly a lot of people tend to gravitate towards peated whiskey, so peated Scotch whiskey. So that would be another one to kind of look into. It's got a very distinct flavor, very smoky or medicinal style of whiskey that can be engaging or interesting to a bourbon drinker. So, peated or sherry cask, those would be the kind of ones that I would try to sway a bourbon drinker into.
Okay, yeah. And I mean, as you've mentioned too, there's such a variety that don't just try one Scotch and be like, I don't like Scotch. Because I've met people who do that.
Oh, yeah.
And it's such a variety, especially the difference between unpeated and peated is just, if you haven't experienced it, I can't even describe it to you. It's so different of an experience. Yeah. And of course, if you want to learn more about Scotch, then you've got to follow Tim because he's posting about it. He's got all the videos about it. Tim, where can folks find you?
So most of my content will be on Instagram, the Whiskey Influencer, whiskey spelled correctly without the E. So make sure you get that right, not the whiskey with the E in it. And I do replicate a lot of my material on TikTok. I just copy and paste because I don't have the energy to make unique content for TikTok. And then I'll post my Instagram lives that I do on YouTube and podcast format. In fact, the Instagram live that you and I had back in like May or June, I still have to upload eventually to YouTube and podcast format. So that'll be another conversation that your listeners can hear once I get that into the various formats.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'll put your handles down in the description below so people can go find you. I know a lot of you guys, you're getting the bourbon side of it from me, and I do cover some Scotch stuff, but if you go give Tim a follow, you're going to learn quite a bit about the different brands. I mean, just in this conversation, how many times was I like, oh, okay, great point. So definitely go give Tim a follow. Tim, thank you for coming on, and thank you for this recommendation. Just to give some closing thoughts on it, I really enjoyed it. Every time that I try a Scotch that's not just something I see at my liquor store, I'm like, oh, this tastes so different than what I expected it to taste like. This has been no exception. This totally has such a fruit-forward, bright palate that I really enjoyed. So thank you for the recommendation, and thank you for the time.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. Hopefully we can talk again soon.
Thank you guys for listening to another episode of Whiskey Noobs. If you need more Whiskey Noobs content in your life, make sure you check out our Patreon page in the show notes. And if you like the show, please make sure to leave a 5-star rating or review. It only takes a couple of minutes, and they're way more helpful than people realize. If you want to do tastings alongside the show, make sure you join the email list by sending an email to whiskynoobspodcast@gmail.com with a subject line that says email list. You'll receive monthly emails with a list of the whiskeys that will be featured throughout the month so that you can buy them ahead of time. You can also find more Whiskey Noobs content on Instagram at @Whisky_Noobs and on TikTok at Whiskey Noobs Podcast. Once again, thank you guys for listening. The Whiskey Noobs Podcast does not support underage or otherwise irresponsible consumption of alcohol.